there is going to come a time in this country when the American people as a group are aroused sufficiently where they're going to go, I'm not doing that. And I do think, the sheep will grow a backbone. And then they'll criminalize non-participation, and I think that's where the real fun will start. And the question is, will American soldiers fire on American citizens? Will American soldiers exterminate in death camps American citizens? And I think initially there's a good chance of that. I mean, Kent State, case in point. But I do think there's a point when American soldiers are going to say, and their commanders are going to say, we're not going along with this now. We're absolutely not going to go along with this. Now, what is hanging over the head of the American military? Well, we are at a couple of disadvantages. One, most of our combat troops are in Afghanistan. Number two, the president has reduced our military force to pre-World War II levels, and he's in the process of doing that now, even though Russia and China have threatened to nuke us on multiple occasions.
Right.
And we have a large military presence in this country of foreign troops. And I think that's the breeding ground for civil war. And, of course, let's not forget that 2 years ago it became discovered that Homeland Security purchased 2,700 armored personnel carriers and over 2 billion rounds of hollow point ammunition. And clearly they're not going to be going to Afghanistan to fight. So who are they prepared to fight against? The American people. And if you were to ask me to make a prognostication, and I don't give dates, but I think the events are lining up to where this scenario is going to play out. And I think the American military could resist. Now, here's your trump card. If World War III starts and the military is in a war for its own survival, that might circumvent the Civil War. Civil War could be replaced by World War III. And I'm real worried about that. As you know, I wrote about that over the weekend.
Yes.
And I talked about a three-pronged Russian attack. And all I did was take news releases, Sputnik News, Russian news sources, American news sources. They collaborated a lot of what my military sources tell me. And what I came up with is something to me that is just so clear that I had to write about it. And it's that if Russia invades the United States, one, they have fifth-column forces in this country that are already here. And I've grown weary of having the debate. I've documented the FEMA Russian ministry bilateral agreement from 2011 that permitted the first 15,000 Russian soldiers to come to America. I published Sherry Wilcox's video of Russian soldiers in uniform in DHS vehicles in Tennessee and in Kentucky. I have published all these eyewitness accounts, some with pictures of Russian soldiers that are here from Alaska to Florida. I'm tired of having the debate. They are here. There are Chinese that are here. And these people are here as part of an international force. They'll fly under the UN flag. This is why we're seeing all the UN vehicles being moved around the country, and I've published those photos as well, too. And we're going to see if the American military won't go along with the subjugation coming out of Jane Helm, we're going to see foreigners come in and jump into the act. And that's where we could see a civil war. I think it's possible. But back to the Russian invasion, you've got a fifth-column force that's been permitted by Obama who's a traitor. And people say, well, can you prove that? Well, let me give you another way we can prove Obama's a traitor. We have a well-documented source and documents from Judicial Watch that show ISIS base camps, particularly the one near El Paso, and Obama does nothing about it. They're right on our doorstep. They do nothing about it. But yet he's willing to chase ISIS into Syria and risk Russian intervention and the Third World War. He lets Russian soldiers come in after Putin has threatened to nuke us no less than 5 times since the advent of Syrian conflict and the conflict over the petrodollar and Iran selling, oil for gold. This man's a traitor. He's let the Alaskan defenses down. There's your first prong of the attack. It'll come through the Bering Strait, cross the ice bridge. Also, he gave away 7 oil-rich islands to the Russians back in 2010, 2 of which can be used to launch an invasion of Alaska. So I think we'd see a multi-pronged invasion of Alaska. He suspended the F-22 flights over the coastal lines of Alaska, and they cited oxygen uptake problems for the pilots. I agree with that. That did occur, but he should have replaced them. The president should have replaced these with F-16s or F-35s, and he didn't. they've cut back dramatically, according to my military sources, on submarine patrols in Alaska. In other words, Alaska has been left defenseless. So we have that to be worried about. The second prong will come out of the North Pole. And if you look at a map of the North Pole, they can strike into Scandinavia and come down into Europe, and I'm talking about the Russian forces that are there. They can also come down through Canada, meet very little resistance until they get down near the American border, and you encounter major Canadian cities, and there's your second prong attack, and the Russians are militarizing the North Pole like there's no tomorrow. Part of the motivation is the North Pole, because the pole has gone through a slight shift, it's exposed these vast natural resources from oil to gold, silver, diamonds, and so forth. So the Russians have jumped into this in a big way, and Scandinavia is scared to death about being invaded. And the United States should be. That's your second prong. But the most dangerous prong, because I think Alaska and the Canadian invasion out of the North Pole are almost more of distractions to tie up American military response. The major thrust is going to occur with the Latin American nations in a Red Dawn scenario. And I'm not just saying this because, two versions of Red Dawn came out and they said that's what was going to happen. Obama has allowed the Latin American states to turn against the United States. He's actually engaged in economic policies to make them our enemies. And who is waiting to pick up the pieces? Putin. And Putin has formed, and I wrote an article about this over the weekend, he's formed alliances with Brazil, obviously the BRIC nations, but militarily. The Russians and the Brazilians are involved in space war technology now. You've got the Nicaraguans. They're accepting Russian airplanes, and their backfire bombers are 800 miles from Houston. You get the idea. And then you've got Panama and Ecuador and Peru. And I could go down the list. There's no less than Cuba. If JFK was alive today, we would have another Cuban Missile Crisis because the Russians have spy ships there, and they've been moving crates in undercover, and I believe they're nuclear missiles, and so do a lot of other people. So you've got all these Latin American states, and this is how bad it got. They had a meeting last year with 33 nations in Latin American states, the American states, and they did not invite Canada or the United States. And so Putin has managed to militarize and align all these Latin American nations against the United States. Now, this is where it gets really kind of spooky. So they move up through Central America, and they come out of Cuba, I believe, in a flotilla formation and invade the southeast. But the main thrust is going to be through the American Southwest. Now, the one saving grace the United States military has, it has superior military power than what could be amassed with Russian aid in Latin America, or so I thought. There was an event on the Mexican border in Arizona that changed my thinking, only because I've got good insider sources, and I ran this by Steve Quayle, what I'm about to reveal here on this show. And Steve said he was aware of the technology. And let me explain to you, aware of the technology. I have referenced no less than 3 times tonight the ISIS base camp near El Paso. There are also 3 other ones that I have been told about by reliable sources. And I'm going to really mince my words here because if I mention agencies or so forth, their identities could be discovered. But their reports are very similar to Judicial Watch. There's nothing extraordinary about the report except there's more than one. And one of them borders Douglas, Arizona. Douglas, Arizona is a border town with Mexico. A week ago tomorrow, I believe it was, an F-16 was not shot down. It crashed near the Mexican border. And I'm thinking, well, that's interesting. And then they announced it was a brigadier general from Iraq. And I thought, oh, isn't that interesting? Because, Iraq and ISIS are having this big conflict over in Iraq. So I thought, well, that's an interesting coincidence. And then I saw the news accounts here, local CBS affiliate. Occasionally I'll catch the news, again, just to see what the enemy's up to. And they said that they couldn't find the body of the pilot. And then the next day, on Thursday, they announced that, yeah, we found the pilot, and he was still in his seat attached to the airplane, and his body was charred and died on impact. And I'm thinking, isn't that interesting? Now, I learned from someone on the inside, and then my best military source knew other people on the inside, and that told him the same thing that I got a tip from someone operating out of Davis-Monthan Air Force Base, where that F-16 originated from. And they contacted me and used, they said, a first-time email from a different server, all the precautions, and says, you need to know this is what's going on. That pilot didn't have a chance to eject. And that pilot did not eject because it was hit with a local EMP weapon that totally fried all the controls in the plane. This is why there was no Mayday call. And then I was told the radar showed that this plane just flat dropped from the sky. It didn't have a crash descent. It just dropped. It just stopped running and dropped. Now, what I've been able to find out about these weapons, and I knew nothing about these weapons specifically, but I documented when I wrote the article on this that Russia sold similar weapons to North Korea back in 2014. So they exist, and the Russians are in this business. And this really gets scary for me because this is what I think this is where this is going to lead. I think this was a beta test. And I believe you had ISIS personnel operating a localized Russian EMP weapon that can read through satellite connections. So in other words, they uplink to satellite, a Russian satellite, and they could read the heat signature of the plane, and they knew they had an F-16, and they launched the weapon against it, fried the electronics, and made the plane crash. Now, how does that play into the Red Dawn scenario? Well, if America has a superior firepower, but you have fifth column insurgency forces with ISIS that could bring down a fair number of American airplanes, and we also know that the Russians are, storehousing, planes in Latin America and their newfound allies, you might tip the balance of power to where an advancing army may get the tactical air support that it needs to invade the American Southwest and then branch out from there. That's where I think this is headed. Now, people say, well, you're kind of out there on this. Well, let's trace the chain of custody here, okay? You've got ISIS in the Judicial Watch report with Mexican government documents that show they're involved in the Sinaloa cartel. And this is work I did last summer with a DEA informant. And let's trace the Sinaloas. They go back to the Sanchez Paredes drug cartel in Peru, which is the largest one in the world, and they're the largest arms shippers and they're the largest drug dealers. And who are their best customers and who are they a conduit for with both weapons and drugs? Well, groups like the Muslim Brotherhood, Hamas, and Hezbollah. In fact, I found a federal document as well from 2007 and a Tucson Police Department memo from 2010 that linked the Mexican drug cartels to Hamas and Hezbollah. Well, where does Russia enter into this? See, this is the Red Dawn part of it. Russia uses Hamas and Hezbollah to run guns to the Assad government so they can fight against the CIA-backed Syrian rebels. So when you follow this chain of custody, and oh, by the way, just as an aside, who runs finance and arms shipments for the Muslim Brotherhood? Malik Obama, the president's half-brother, and he has never disavowed his half-brother's actions. In fact, I've got pictures of them together. There's never been a disavowing of his half-brother's actions. And this is why I believe that ISIS will soon be in possession, if they're not already, of these localized EMP weapons. And when I was talking to Steve Quayle about this yesterday morning, I said, were you aware of this? And he goes, oh, yeah. He said, and there's a big space-based warfare going on right now. They're trying to kill each other's satellites just because of this kind of thing. And I think this is what America is looking at with World War III. People think that we can't be invaded. And by the way, when I printed this article, here's what I got. We have 300 million handguns. There'll be an American behind every blade of grass. Okay, keep thinking that, because that's not going to turn the tide on what could be coming. And do I lose sleep over this? Yeah, there's nowhere to run or hide when this happens. And to the people of Baltimore and Ferguson, you think it's funny to get out in the streets and burn down businesses in your own neighborhood because of some perceived racial injustice. When the Chinese and Russian tanks roll down your street, they're not going to view black people, white people, Jewish people, Christian people any differently.
Obama said yesterday, you're not going to beat ISIS with guns. It's going to be ideas.
I have this idea that you're not going to behead me?
I know. It's I can't wrap my mind around it either. I read a comment. Somebody said, "Well, put all your notebooks with ideas on it and take them in your backpacks and go head overseas, and that'll scare them." I don't get it. But they're saying that they can win with ideas, yet they're still shipping guns with tax money to these people.
I had on Scott Bennett. I don't know if you guys have got the pleasure and privilege of interviewing that American hero, but Scott Bennett was an Army Special Operations officer, and he discovered that the CIA was funding ISIS through Swiss bank accounts. He came on my show. He named names of people who were directly involved with these bank accounts. Yes, and it was easy for me to believe. Yeah, but you know how ISIS got started. It's when we abandoned Iraq, we also abandoned military equipment. By the way, if you're a military commander and you leave equipment behind and you had a choice and the enemy is able to use it, you're court-martialed. You could even go to prison for this. And yet we left this equipment behind by ISIS, and no one in the media even bats an eye, like, oh, gee, that's just what happens, when this type of stuff is dealt with. No, it's not what happens. It was a total violation of every military regulation and procedure that we have. And then we find out the CIA is promoting this. You look at, the CIA doesn't work for America. They work for the New World Order. Right. Obama and Putin both work for the New World Order, and they're pushing us towards the inevitable. And the only path I see out of this, short of divine intervention, and I had this conversation with many people, where many people think it's too late and we're going to go through our problems and all you can hope to get is divine intervention from the Lord. But short of divine intervention to save our country, and I don't think God would be of the mind to do that. After all, we've killed 60 million babies since the 70s, and gay marriage is legal. I could go on and on and on. We're clearly a nation under judgment. So the only hope we have from the physical realm, not the spiritual realm, but the physical realm, is for our military to rise up right now. But the military has told me, people in the military have told me, I've asked them, why haven't you had a military coup against this traitor? And they have said, no revolution ever succeeds without the popular support of the people, and too many people watch CNN. That's a quote from a former two-star general that I know.
Wow. And,
we almost had the coup with Benghazi, but see, it was a coup of opportunity, not necessarily a coup of long-term planning. As General Ham, the commander of AFRICOM at the time, and Admiral Guyette of Carrier Task Force 3 had all discovered from their intelligence that Ambassador Stevens was under attack, and they're going to go rescue him. But they also knew what Stevens was into. He was CIA. So, he helped overthrow and kill Gaddafi because he was raising money through gun trafficking, kid trafficking, and drug trafficking to fund, Al-Qaeda and all the other groups that were in Libya working against Gaddafi. And then he was doing the same thing in Syria. So word started to leak out before the 2012 election, and I had a couple of sources come to me, and both together, and said, you need to write this. And I said, I can't write this without proof. You need to write this. I can't write this without more proof. You need to write this or we'll never give you anything again. 2 weeks of going through this. Finally, in October, I wrote this, and basically what it was is Obama wanted these people dead because the word was leaking out, particularly from Ambassador Stevens, and this would have carried into the election. And they didn't want anything hanging out because Obama's election was not guaranteed at that point. And so Ham disobeyed Panetta. He was going to launch a rescue mission. Admiral Guyette disobeyed orders, and he had launched surveillance drones and weaponized drones and was going to use them. But before the rescue force could be sent to stop this, both men were arrested by their number twos that were also CIA plants that Obama had installed in key positions in the military for just such a purpose. Their plan was to grab Stevens and parade him out, and he'd know that he'd been set up for death. In fact, he knew it anyway. He'd asked Hillary Clinton 3 times to increase his bodyguard contingent, and she refused. Come on, we can't afford the force? We can't take his bodyguard contingent from 4 men to 40 men? That's going to make a difference in the national security budget? Unbelievable. He knew he was a marked man, and he knew why. He knew they had to tie up loose ends. So he would have sung like a canary, and that's what Guyette and Ham were hoping, because remember, Obama was on the tear of firing every military officer seemingly he could get his hands on.
Yep.
But it failed. See, it was a coup of opportunity. And so I was really hopeful after I learned about this. Oh, my gosh, the military is going to rise up against this despot, and they're going to take him out of office. And then it didn't happen, and more time happened, and it didn't happen. And you have more generals and admirals fired, and it still didn't happen. So I'm going to my sources. What's wrong with you guys? You came really close with Benghazi. Why aren't you doing something now? Answer, we don't have the support of the people.
Oh,
and
man.
And that's where we're and see, this is part of what drives me to be relentless, because I'm trying to tip the balance here of people awake versus people asleep, because I know the military will not act until the people start to rise up. And I believe that the people rise up, that would give us our one opportunity. Now, we'd have one heck of a civil war in this country, because these Russian forces are here just for this purpose. So this is the one thing that I think is the only thing in the physical realm that we have at our disposal, is the military may come to our aid.
Well, and you make a good point there, and you also make just an excellent your July 4th report by Dave Hodges about Russia launching a three-pronged invasion of the United States. Scroll down. We'll read the whole article, but pay very close attention to the information contained with Ecuador, Venezuela, Bolivia, Brazil, El Salvador, and also the takedown of the American F-16. In the conclusions reached by Mr. Hodges, I think it's extremely important. This is a very fact-filled article, and you did a very great job, in my view, of explaining all of this, really, setting this up. Cuba as well. That bothers the heck out of me, seeing what's taking place with Cuba, even on the diplomatic side, under the pretense of normalizing relations with Cuba. What's going on there?
You know, I ran a video, March 27th. March 27th of this year, Fort Lauderdale, we see a dissident extraction drill, complete with helicopters, white vans, people parading across a crosswalk under armed guard with their hands up. It doesn't get any more clear than this. And so Jade Helm has been underway for a while. We have Jade Helm, big time was going on in April. In fact, we've had so many foreign troops in this country, it's hard to count. This is one that's going to catch you off guard. You're not. This is almost not believable. But I had information, and then I was able to document this in April. Around the middle to end of April, there was an 8-day drill done with Michigan Army reservists and National Guard members with Danish troops. Danish troops.
Okay.
That's just, I mean, does that strike you as odd as it struck me?
Yeah.
Danish troops? But, you know, people need to know, if we have civil unrest in this country, both Mexico and Canada have signed an agreement that they'd send their troops in to help the government. And the UN has pledged their support. And, you know, Jade Helm could get really ugly. I had a story that I would never have let seen the light of day for my website, except I had confirmation of a lot of this stuff on the outside. I had a man named Marlon Brock who lives in Big Spring, Texas, not too far from Midland, and he asked me if I wanted him to go keep an eye on the Walmart. There are actually 2 Walmarts in Midland that have had suspicious activities. One of them is closed. And I said, sure, absolutely, I appreciate that. And he responded to one of those ads that I put that I mentioned earlier, you know, join the team of the Common Sense Show and tell us what you see and send us your pictures. He found some real notable events, and I'll return to his contribution this. Now, in the meantime, this is the story I would never have run without some outside, verification. There was a man who wrote to me, would not use his name, and he called himself The Watcher. I kid you not, The Watcher. And I'm thinking, okay, this is a load of crap. And here's what he said. They came into the Walmart in Midland through a tunnel. He said they narrowed the front entrance down to like you couldn't get very far into the building without being single file, and they were installing a TSA-type security device. And he said they did the same thing with behind steel doors in the back of the Walmart. And he said, interesting thing, Dave, they've taken out every piece of shelving. And so he also said that his part in what he was doing was he was involved in redoing the ventilation system. Okay, now just keep those variables in mind, then I'll return to the extra things he told me. Marlon Brock, and I published these photos in an article, Marlon went to this Midland Walmart. He photographed people on the roof looking like they were redoing the ventilation system. He took 2 pictures of large trucks carrying out the shelving from this Walmart. Everything this guy was telling me in his first email, Marlon had photographed in some fashion. And I was thinking, oh my goodness, okay, I'm going to run these 2 stories together because Marlon gives the photographic evidence for what this guy is largely telling me. Plus, Marlon also captured a photograph, and boy, was this interesting. He took a picture of a black truck, and the name just jumps out of my head, like the Central Intelligence Group or something like this. I'd have to go back and look it up. But it was a group that's headquartered out of Arkansas. It's a private security firm, and they're in 5 different states. They were providing the security outside the Midland Walmart, and Marlon took pictures of this. Well, the guy on the inside, Mr. No Name, who called himself Watcher, was saying that he named the group. He named the same group. He said they were on the inside providing security, and it was strict. One of the things he said to me that really disturbed me, he said in the northeast corner of the store, he said they had huge black curtains that they put down, and it covered maybe 10% of the store. And none of those employees that were in there, he said they were all dressed in tan overalls, and he said not one of them was allowed to talk to any other worker on the inside. And they weren't allowed to take breaks when everyone else did. They took their breaks behind the curtain. And all the other people were told, you can't engage these people. You may not speak to them. And whatever they were working on greatly concerned him because he said it was so secret. Now, he's done jobs like this for the government, according to what he told me. And he said, most of our work's compartmentalized, and we don't really know the overall of what we're doing, but I've been reading your articles. And he says, it's helped me kind of put 2 and 2 together. And he says, remember, Dave, we are working on ventilation. Well, here Marlon Brock took those photos. And now you have people working quietly and secretly who can't interact with other people behind curtains. I hate to say this, guys, and I know this sounds crazy, but the first thing I thought of was gas chambers. I know that sounds nuts.
Mm-hmm.
But how do I know this guy was for real that was inside the Walmart? Well, Marlon Brock's photos verified about 60% of what he told me.
The photos, by the way, folks, can be found at thecommonsenseshow.com. The article from June 2nd of this year, the agency you're talking about, security is Central Defense Security.
There you go. That's it.
Yep,
yes.
Yep.
These guys were on the inside, and they were the ones enforcing the no fraternization rule with these strange employees operating in secret. But he also said that they had replaced, the Watcher said this now. Now, Marlon would have no way of knowing this because he wasn't on the inside, but he said that they replaced the shelving with other kinds of shelving. And he said he wasn't sure what it could be used for. He said it could be used to handle heavy military equipment. That thought occurred to him. But he also said you put a mattress on it, it could have been bunk beds, rows and rows and rows of bunk beds. Wow. And he said he wasn't sure which one it was, but he said he thought it was one of the 2. And this is what freaked him out. The fact that these guys, he said, one of the first things he said to me, I would never have written to you except for the fact that I know you'll understand what I'm telling you. And these guys are working in secret here, and it's very bizarre. I've never seen anything like it on any of the government jobs that we've been contracted for. He mentioned to me once he was involved about 5 years ago of sealing up caves on federal forest land. And he said, we thought the government had something in there they wanted to hide, but we didn't know it was all compartmentalized. He said he'd never seen anything like this before. And then when the shelving's out, and he comes back in one day for his shift, and they brought these guys in on these little mining cars they have. He described them like mining cars, and they come along this track. And he said that they're forced to change clothes. They can have no electronics on them whatsoever, no iPods, no nothing, no cell phones, obviously. And their whole group almost got kicked out. He said one day a guy forgot and actually had the cell phone in his pocket. He wasn't trying to hide it, but they were so upset they threatened to send the whole group home. So they make them change clothes in these overalls, and they do their work. And when they're done, they have to leave the overalls there, and then they change back. So there's no chance of getting any contraband in or out, and no way to take any pictures. And his story was convincing only because I could visualize it from the pictures I had. Taking the shell, let's keep in mind now, let's back up with Walmart for a second. Why did they close the Midland store? Well, for the same reason they said they closed the other 4 stores initially, because of plumbing problems. Well, what does shelving in a Walmart have to do with a plumbing problem?
Good question.
Yeah, I don't know. Nothing,
yeah,
really.
And I asked him, I said, the bathrooms. I said, how was that? He goes, we used them. There was nothing wrong with them. I'm not joking. I wrote that back to him, and he said they used the bathrooms inside the Walmart. So that's not why they closed the Walmart. And they've completely retrofitted this Walmart for something. Now, I had a Texas Ranger write to me anonymously, and I believe him, because not only did he tell me stuff that made sense and fit in, he told me something word for word what a high-ranking officer in the Dallas Police Department told me. He said, we're worried about an ISIS incursion, and we're trying to harden militarily Texas. He said, we believe we're going to be invaded, and how big it's going to be and what the scope is, we're not sure. And I published that email he sent to me anonymously, although I know his rank. I left his rank out because I was afraid it would give him away. But let's put it this way. He wasn't a first-year Army Ranger. And he said a lot of the stuff that made sense with regard to Walmart. It could be a military supply depot, because we know that Walmart changed their logistics for supply and delivery to military specs several years ago so they could be converted in times of war. And so what the Army Ranger said, he says, don't look at the Walmart as FEMA detention centers. Look at them as military supply depots against an invasion into Texas. And I thought, okay, that makes sense, but I'm not sure.
It ain't pretty either way.
No, I would rather it be a military operation, because at least it's something wholesome designed to defend America.
True.
I'd prefer that over this is where we're going to process people. And so many of these places are along railroad track lines, and the images of World War II and Nazi Germany come up with the death camps. And this Walmart's no different. And there's just some bizarre stuff. And
but see, Dave, let me ask you a question though. Okay, when you bring that up about hardening, interior areas using Walmart. So let's say that Texas Ranger is 100% accurate. That this is absolutely what's going on here. Why are we even allowed? See, what I don't get, and help me understand this. Why are we allowing the ISIS encampments? I don't care if they're over into Mexico. I mean, look, we've got no problem bombing foreign countries. I mean, we don't have any problem with that at all. Surgical strikes. Yeah. So if let's assume for a moment, let's go with that narrative. Why aren't we being more proactive with the ISIS, encampments and the potential for invasion right now? I mean,
yeah. Well, what I've said earlier in the show and what I've said in writing is that Obama will risk war with Russia by chasing ISIS into Syria, and Russia said they'll defend Syria at all costs, but he won't cross 3 miles over the border and take care of a definitive threat.
Okay.
So, and of course we know the CIA supports ISIS, and we have a traitor at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, and I'm not using that term lightly. He's done everything to weaken the military at a time when we should be extremely worried. I mean, China's on the verge of passing up our naval prowess. Their submarine fleet is approaching our level. And what is he doing? Reducing our military to pre-World War II levels. And as I mentioned earlier, he's left Alaska defenseless. He's let the Latin American states align against the United States, so much so where they exclude us from their economic meetings. You know, I could go on and on here. This man is an absolute and abject traitor. We have Russian ships and spy ships in Cuba, and what did Obama do? Normalize relations with them.
Yeah.
It just doesn't end. This man's a traitor. So yeah, help you understand the way you understand why Obama's not going after ISIS across the Mexican border. He's a traitor.
Yeah. I have no problem understanding that. And of course, you know what gets me, and I say this so often, and I'm sure the regular listeners are going to start throwing stuff at their computers and stuff for me saying this again. But all of this could have been stopped with Obama's bona fides being verified and his constitutional lack of eligibility. You know, we could have stopped this way back when, but we had media complicity. You had collusion with the highest levels of government. You had good old John Brennan out there acting as a national security advisor for his campaign and being elevated to the CIA, and of course all kinds of stuff happening with his passport. But we could have stopped this.
Yeah, John McCain. 2008 campaign, and Larry Elder in that interview I recorded between Sean Hannity and Larry Elder, very telling interview. I couldn't believe this was mainstream media. I said, here you got Fox and ABC, you know, both telling you Bill Ayers is a terrorist, and he launched the political career of Barack Obama. That's mainstream media, folks. Larry Elder broadcasts on ABC radio, and Sean Hannity is on Fox. And they're both saying this. And it even got worse, because in the 2008 election, Larry Elder said this, and I'll quote. He said that John McCain was confronted with the fact that Bill Ayers was a terrorist. He launched Obama's political career. Why aren't you making a campaign issue out of this? And he says, why do I care about an old, washed-up terrorist? That's in that interview. If you go to my article yesterday and you see Sean Hannity, Larry Elder, you got to listen to this, folks. I mean, this is mainstream media saying exactly what Doug and Joe Hagmann and Dave Hodges are saying right here tonight, is that we are being sold out by a traitor, and a traitor with genocidal intentions, because that's the nature of the man who launched his political career.
You know, that brings me up to something that I wanted to ask you about. Remember the press in Russia, the media in Russia, when Barack Obama, I think it was before his Illinois Senate, his state election. I mean, he was an unknown, and we had there was somebody in Russia, in Russian media, saying, "Oh, Barack is going to be the next, the first black communist Marxist or communist Muslim president." There was an account in the media. Didn't you and I speak about this, either on or off air at some point?
Yeah, we did, and there was a whole lot of complicity in this. It wasn't just the Russians. I mean, the Communist Party of the United States endorsed Barack Obama.
Right.
It's you know, I was talking about Bill Ayers before Obama was elected, and no one wanted to deal with it.
Man.
You know, I'll tell you who's lucky to be alive? Sarah Palin. When she ran as the figurehead for women on McCain's ticket, Sarah Palin, you know what she called out? She said, there's going to be a revolution in Ukraine if Obama's elected. She predicted that, and she was right. And she said, my state's under threat of being invaded by Russia. And the media just vilified her. And now we know today that Alaska is basically defenseless from a military standpoint. Sarah Palin was right on so many issues. You know, as time has gone on, I've really developed a respect for her. She's not some bubble-headed bimbo. I mean, this woman has a brain, and she was professional and she was good. And I think the reason that she's out of politics is she got told, if you want to live to see tomorrow, you shut up and stop talking.
Wow, I can believe that. I mean, it's certainly not.
She was actually thought she was supposed to do her job. Hey, I wanted to ask you a question too, Doug. Along this, I always laugh at this kind of report. Here it's July 4th. Okay, so Obama gets on the airways, says, "Americans, go to your events, have your fun, but just be watchful. Okay, see something, say something." And we have reports, according to the media, the FBI says there are 56 legitimate terrorist threats in the United States from ISIS. How do they know it's 56 and not 57? And if they know how many there are, then why haven't they moved to arrest people connected to this? I mean, the information had to come from somewhere. It wasn't written on the bathroom wall, I don't think.
Okay, hands off these terrorists here in this country. I believe that's the order, standing orders from the Department of Justice, Obama's Department of Justice, as well as the White House. So you've got and the State Department. I believe that to be the case. I mean, any one of these 56 or 57, or pick a number, any one of these incidents would certainly be a bonanza, in my view, for additional security encroachments against the American people. This is just my feeling. A dirty bomb going off in an unnamed Pennsylvania city. Don't forget the movement of the nuclear materials back in 2013. And then Guccifer coming out and saying, "Hey, there's going to be a potential nuclear attack." I mean, he was talking about a nuclear attack based on his hacking of certain government documents and memos. And of course, they jailed him. But having said all of that, well, look what happened after Oklahoma City. The bonanza for the security state, the apparatus here, right after the Oklahoma City bombing, which, and I don't care what you say about it, I mean, what people say about it, there had to be some level of knowledge by our government. And following that incident, that horrific incident, you had the most draconian police state type of laws go into effect without any debate than any other time in history. So what would a nuclear explosion do, or a dirty bomb, or some sort of bio attack over the 4th of July holiday? What would that do? It would do a whole lot.
Yeah, it's all in the name of security. So,
yeah.
Boogeyman is always out there.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we're always at war. We're always supposed to be fearful. I mean, this is the government talking, of course. It's a fight against the terrorists. Of course, we're not at war with Islam.
But you've got a situation here with Obama where this man is pure evil. He does know what's going on, and he knows who he serves. And the American people too. And this is something too that really bothered me. He goes over and he meets the sheikh and the prince of the Walla Walla guy of Saudi Arabia, and he bows to him.
Oh yeah, wow, a good point. I think I wrote about that too, because what the Saudis saw was the front portion of the bow. What the American people saw was the rear portion of that bow. And
right?
Exactly, but you're right. This obviously was a nod to perhaps the foreign controllers. I mean, look at Arab Springs. I really believe Arab Spring was, well, not believe it. I mean, we can prove that Arab Spring was not spontaneous. It was drafted really in the bowels of Saudi mansions, and to really restructure the power within the Middle East between the United States, the French, and the British, and some other countries as well. But those were the three, and we were doing the Saudi bidding, and even today, I mean, we're by proxy, our American military is really an arm of the Saudi government, if you will, and our CIA intelligence is an arm of the Saudi government.
Well, I think people who keep up with this can see through this stuff pretty clearly. We're being marshaled towards our ultimate destruction. And the path is very clear and it's unmistakable, and we're being torn apart from without and from within. I mean, the moral structure of this country is reprehensible. But if people expect me to legitimize and say, oh yeah, God thinks that's okay, gay marriage, no, he doesn't. He calls it an abomination. The Bible speaks very clearly on the topic. Do I think we should deny jobs, incarcerate, bully? No, I don't. These people are going to be held accountable for their actions, as I will when we stand before our Maker. But to legitimize this process by gay marriage is one thing. But where the gay marriage thing is going is not the big threat. See, I don't view homosexuals as my enemy. But like I said, I don't believe in persecution. But where this is leading is horrific. They have now extended homosexuality and gay marriage into defense of transgenderism. Now, I'm going to speak from my mental health background as a practitioner here. Back in the days when I was trained and practiced, this was called gender identity disorder. You know, and by the way, you do not change your gender because you get your secondary sex characteristics changed. You don't change your DNA. It's just a facade. And what they're doing is using the homosexual movement and the gay marriage movement to legitimize a total perversion and total mental illness. But it's not going to stop there, Doug, because what's the next step? You know, even in the dark days of Rome, we never saw arguments endorsing bestiality, and that's been taken out of the military code of justice now, where it's no longer a crime. We didn't see arguments defending pedophilia. And you have that wonderful group, and I say that in quotes, called NAMBLA, the North American Man-Boy Love Association. And who gave $2 million to them? None other than globalist George Soros. That's where this is headed. The pedophilia, where they will victimize our young children for their own pleasures and legitimize it, make it legal. There's going to be a pedophilia lobby. Listen, if I'd have said 20 years ago, there's going to be gay marriage, and the White House is going to have rainbow colors in support of it, people have said, Hodges, you're nuts. You need to be taken away to a crazy house. Well, I'm telling you right now, it ain't going to be 20 years. It's coming in the near future. You're going to see strong arguments where you're going to have pedophiles being a lobby in this country. And all you have to do is look at recent sexual past practice history to know that I'm right.
Oh, you're absolutely right. 1987, I'm not even sure if people recall this. There was a homosexual march in Washington, and in 1987, the this lobby, if you will, put forth a series of demands that included and I'm quoting this, an anti-homophobic curriculum implemented in schools nationwide. But another, what you just mentioned there, normalizing reducing the age of consent to the point where it would be really
Doug, let me interrupt a second. NAMBLA's moniker saying, and this goes to your age of consent comment, its moniker saying is sex before 8 or it's too late. Are we Americans going to accept this?
That's crazy.
Accept it. Many are celebrating. Well, you know, yeah, that's a good point. I mean, oh man.
See, and let me be real clear here. I am not saying that people of the gay lifestyle are going to engage in pedophilia. You know, my critics would take that and expand what I've said and use it to falsely attack me. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying, it's a bootstrap argument. It's from the gay movement to the transgender movement to the pedophilia movement. That's called bracket creep. And this is what we're going to see inch by inch. It's a cinch. And if you remember, just keep this in mind, your bankers, a lot of your top officials are Satanists. They don't worship God and Jesus. They worship Satan. And so should this surprise anybody?
That's a great point. And it's a great place to conclude, I think. You know, it's unfortunately it's a good stopping point at this point. Dave, you've just been a tremendous guest. What a wealth of knowledge and what a huge amount of information, folks. I just hope that I know that the listeners gleaned a lot of information from tonight's interview. Dave's website, Dave Hodges is our guest, certainly a 5-star guest. His website is thecommonsenseshow.com. His show heard every Sunday night from from beginning at 8 o'clock, 8 to 11. Fantastic show, Eastern Time, that is. thecommonsenseshow.com. Prolific writer. I go to his website every day to check on new articles, and I suggest you do as well. Bookmark his website. Dave, any last words, comment, or that's a poor choice of words. Any closing comments?
Knowledge is useless without action behind it. And if the audience has heard anything that Doug or Joe or I have said, that you said, yeah, that makes some sense, take action. Do something. Write a letter. Tell a neighbor. Do a sit-down protest. Do something, because we're running out of time. And if we get beyond this fall and into the Christmas season, I'm going to be surprised. I'm not making a prediction, but that's how short I think the time could be. When I wrote the article, I said the Russian invasion could come any time with Red Dawn. I mean that. It could come tomorrow. We're living on borrowed time with the economy. I think we're living on borrowed time with our military security. And I think that, people right now, you care about your families, and I know you do, and you care about the future of this country, and there are a lot of great things about America and Americans. Then we need to start acting, not just knowing, but take this knowledge and put it into action.
Wow. Great words of advice. And everyone, please, that's sage advice regardless of where you are in your belief in terms of what's going on, where you are. It's just sage advice. Dave, my friend, thank you so much. You are a gracious guest. Thank you so much for being part of our program tonight. And my goodness.
Well, I owed you 1 times 10, so it's always my pleasure to come on this great show with your wonderful audience, because I hear from so many of them after I'm on, and you've got just great listeners, and I'm glad that the Common Sense Show and the Hagmann and Hagmann Report are joining forces in so many different ways. I think the beneficiaries will be our listening audiences.
Amen, brother. And it's only we are going to come out fighting a lot stronger, a lot more efficiently, and really giving the globalist, Satanist scumbags out there a run for their money. And I know that we're together on this. And thank you for tonight. Thank you, as always, for your kindness, for your generosity, and certainly for your extensive research. We really appreciate it. Dave, thank you so very much. God bless you.
Okay, thank you, guys. Take care.
Thanks, Dave.